and an event happens, and maybe someone expresses an attitude that maybe isn't appropriate, and does the culture deal with that? So I think what I see evidence of here is a culture that's strong in both directions, both from a leadership point of view, and from what I can tell from this data, I don't see any strong evidence that there's a big problem with the culture, but the culture should always be questioning itself. So every one of you, chief, owe yourself the job of questioning your own behavior on every given day. I come from an industry that culture is very important. It's a nuclear power industry, and we always are talking about our culture in that industry. So I congratulate you on your leadership and this organization here as well. I do have a question for you with respect to hiring. My understanding is that there are, you listen to NPR enough, you hear certain groups are burdened by a higher rate of arrest records and other law enforcement actions. And I'm wondering, in our hiring, when we look at someone who maybe had an arrest 10 years ago, they've had a chance to become more mature, how is that factored into our hiring process? Do we allow people to grow out of maybe their youthful indiscretions or whatever might have led to them having a record of some type?
I'm glad we do, or perhaps I wouldn't have a job, I'm not sure. No need to look anything up. I am often at odds with some of my leadership team because there are oftentimes they will bring a candidate before me and say, yeah, I think we're going to wash this guy out because of X, Y, Z, and I will say, well, wait a minute, how long ago was that? Was that 5 years ago? Was it more than that? It wasn't that serious. Obviously, to have a police officer who has been through a criminal arrest in the past does not always set up the best reputation for the problem for an agency. You want people that have as clean of a background as possible. But with that being said, well, I don't want to single any one of you out, but no. We will look at past indiscretions. We will look at the period of time that has passed. If somebody, well, I can think of it now. I can think we had an officer who had been arrested back in his college years out on Cape Cod. He's no longer, he retired a little while ago, several years ago, and it was not held against him. It was a youthful indiscretion, so to speak. And so the department still had faith in him. He was a local kid that grew up here, and he ended up with the job, and he did a great job, and then he left the department after 17 years and went on to something else. So we certainly do take it into consideration. When it gets to something like a convicted felon and possession of marijuana, there are certain things that statutorily disqualify you from being able to attend the academy. But we are willing to look at past indiscretions, and if enough time has passed and we have indicators that a person is matured and those indiscretions aren't something that impact their future judgment, then we'll consider them further. They don't always make it all the way, but it is something that we will consider, and if we need to look beyond it, then we'll do that. There's a bill before the legislature this year that says if it's been 5 years since a person's been arrested, you can't consider it, provided it's not a felony, and that you can't even ask on the job application if they have a criminal history until you determine that they are otherwise qualified. Just like you can't ask certain medical questions, certain drug use questions until you give them an offer of employment. And criminal history is probably going to go along that same way.
And I think our police department officers and personnel here, they can ask questions too and make statements if you want. Anyone else has any questions, statement, concern? Yes.
The DOJ investigation into Ferguson also mentioned that the municipal court system was an accomplice to the racial bias over there. Do we have any concern about the Connecticut court system, and maybe what data is there to support that?
That's a CHRO question.
Probably more of an ACLU question because most of our CHRO cases are handled at CHRO. But we haven't seen any real spike in the numbers of cases that are filed against like the judicial department and things of that sort. So I think I want to pass this to David.
That's fair. Phone a friend. Yeah, not directly, but there's actually a bill up on Friday at the legislature. It's the Governor's Second Chance Society bill. Basically what that bill will do is tries to remove a lot of mandatory minimums and would defelonize the simple possession of every drug. Right now, marijuana is the only drug that if you have just simple possession, not with intent to sell, you will not get a felony. In fact, it's been criminalized. But bills like this are important because they'll give people, some judges meaningful discretion, and then also take the pressure off the criminal justice system. So I think that's the best way I can answer that. I hope that was helpful.
Chief, do you want to read?
No. I'm not sure. I don't know what the court system, I don't know statistically where they stand as far as, the court system, the prosecutors have, the local prosecutors, and the way it works in Connecticut, our prosecutors are not elected. We have judicial districts throughout the state, and there is a judicial selection panel that selects the top prosecutor for each judicial district, which is basically by county, and then they appoint their assistant prosecutors that work at places like Manchester and Enfield. And then there's a chief state's attorney who is the state's chief criminal prosecutor who has no authority over all of the other prosecutors. It's a very interesting system. So essentially each of the prosecutors works in a world of their own. So decisions as nollies, what cases get dismissed, what cases get prosecuted, I don't know what the statistical analysis of that shows. I don't know if there is an existing statistical analysis of that or not. And so, sometimes when we get in conversations about the whole traffic stop thing and what the police officers do, and I often say, well, what about the rest of the system? What prosecutors are making what decisions as to who they're going to prosecute, who they're not going to prosecute, who are they going to give a nollie to, who are they going to give a dismissal to, and what goes into that process. So I really think the traffic stops and police officer conduct, so to speak, is kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the criminal justice system.
That's absolutely true.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll start here and I'll come on in.
Yeah, in the last census, the fastest growing category was people who identify themselves as multiracial. I was wondering whether this is playing a role in the studies that are going on.
Actually, before you answer, we'll take 2-3 questions at the same time.
Chief, I was wondering if you could explain whether there is a definition of a legitimate stop, because I'm curious as to whether of the minority individuals who are stopped, whether there is a comparison done as to whether they are charged and whether those charges there is a follow through on those they're good charges, in other words.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, when you got the information back in September, when you got that report and you broke it out here, which is what you showed us, what talk did you have with the officers in your department? And my second question is, in order to be a true leader, don't you have to admit that there is an issue? Because as in Ferguson, their chief was praising their officers and everything else, and as you all know, he's stepping down next week due to the comments, the report that the DOJ came out with. So I think to say that nothing goes on is a problem. We're all human, and people do make mistakes, and people do have biased opinions. And I think to be a true leader, you have to admit that you have a problem, because you can't fix what you don't acknowledge.
Okay, we'll take a 4th one. Please keep track of the questions.
Okay. As a resident, I did want to compliment the police department that, I feel safe, and I want to commend all the officers in town. But at one of the statistics that you did post on officer number 4 that you had, I thought that was an awful lot of stops. 476, that's more than one a day, and 356 also, and that's still more than one a day. But, it's just curious about what are some other the breakdowns of what were the reasons or some of the statistics behind those stops. Would be interesting to know, because that is more than double than all the other officers that you did provide. And I know we have more than 4 officers in town.
I wrote them all down there. Got them all here. The high number of stops, that particular officer was in training at the time, so she was encouraged to make an extraordinary number of stops because there was a training process that was going on. You're right, I didn't break down for all the other officers. We have roughly 22 officers that actually work patrol, that are out there in uniform in the cruisers every day. I didn't want to obviously bring up 22 officers and all of their stats, and quite frankly, I haven't done all of them. We just got the breakdown of the data to allow me to see specific officers. Only recently did I have access to that so that I could start to look at those numbers. So I thought that was a good demonstration today, or a good illustration of the officers and the amount of work they do. We do encourage officers to stop cars. We know that traffic stops are one of the #1 ways to catch bad guys. All of our most glamorous arrests start with traffic stops, and you look nationwide, you think of the Murrow building being bombed and the Twin Tower bombings. Traffic stops, that's what nets you criminals. That kind of addresses the last question. The definition of a legitimate stop, and are those followed through? Mr. Barone's statistics that he has, they follow through post-stop information. In other words, what was the person, how were they cited? Did they get a warning? Did they get a written warning? Did they get an infraction, which is a traffic ticket? Did they get a misdemeanor summons, meaning it's a more serious offense? Or were they actually arrested because there was some crime committed, or maybe they were wanted on a warrant? So he has more of those details. Again, I didn't want to go through every bit of it, but when the report comes out, and again, the report will be available, all publicly accessible through ctrp3.org or ctrp3.com. All that information will be available. I have a feeling the media will run all those numbers for everybody to be able to see. As far as whether the arrest was ultimately good or not, I assume you're alluding to the prosecution process. That I don't think we know. You didn't do anything with the outcome of any of the tickets or anything?
What we collect is we also collect the reason, so where they stopped for speeding, for
right.
a display of plate violation, and what we've done, and what you'll see in the report, is that first of all, it's very easy in this state. The motor vehicle laws are written where I could guarantee you I could drive behind any of you leaving here today and after 15 seconds find a legal reason to pull you over. Yep. So the question is never, is there a legitimate or a legal reason to stop somebody? There almost always is. The question becomes on what was the reason for the stop, and what level of discretion did the officer have. And in this state, the largest infraction is still speeding that people are pulled over and cited for.
So as far as the court disposition, that's not included. I don't think, and oftentimes court dispositions are long past the time when the ticket is issued, by the time somebody actually goes to court, or whether they paid the fine, or whether it gets acknowledged. We don't have the full circle on the charge. So what defines a legitimate stop? I think just as he said, motor vehicle violation, and they pull them over. Again, they take the post-stop information, who was searched, who wasn't searched, and those are some interesting numbers to look at. We almost have to drill down to everyone and find out what went on in this particular case that caused you to search or not search the car. The question about what did we do with the numbers when the numbers first came out? I think this whole time we all are kind of scratching our heads saying, okay, the numbers are out here, but what do they mean? 2 years ago, I testified before the legislatures. We talked about the Alvin Penn Act, and we talked about some preliminary, very, very preliminary information. And my question to, I think it was the Judicial Committee that I was testifying before, I said, what do you want? Tell us what the standard is. And they couldn't tell us what the standard is, so I don't know what the standard is. So if I'm going to say our officers are doing something wrong or admit that we have a problem, I need to be able to articulate that. Because if I say that to one of my officers, they're going to say, okay, Chief, what am I doing wrong? And just as I showed you up here, what am I supposed to say? That you stopped, 20% of the people you stopped were black. I think that's wrong. They're going to say, okay, well, how many should I stop? I don't have an answer to that question. And that was the same question I posed to the Judiciary Committee, and I was lambasted by a couple of the legislators because they thought I was ignoring the issue, putting my head in the sand. I said, well, no, but I have to face my officers and I have to give them a standard. They'll meet the expectation if you give it to them. So what do I say they're doing wrong? So what I think the value of this conversation is, and when you ask what am I doing with the numbers, I think I have put it out to all of them. We've had several emails that have gone out to say, listen, these are the numbers. I can't analyze them. I don't know what they mean. But the message to them is, just as someone here just said a minute ago, I think Mr. Wagner said, you've got to examine what you do every day. You've got to examine the choices you make, and you've got to think to yourself, am I stopping this car just because this person is black, or am I stopping them because they were going 73 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone? The answer is, they're going 73 in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. Their job is to go out there and stop people who commit violations. So I think what I want to know is, what is the standard? What should we expect? And I think as we look at all of the data that's collected around the state, and again, this was only a 7-month period, it'll be interesting to see what the 2015 numbers are. How does the trending go over the years? And how does that relate to populations? I think having this conversation, that's what we're doing. We want to know how people perceive this. I want our officers to hear what you have to say. Because again, I have to go to them individually if I'm going to make changes, and I have to say, 1, you're doing something that may be wrong. 2, this is how you need to change that behavior. And this is how we're going to analyze it in the future. So I think everybody now knows what these numbers are. This is kind of a base, and we'll have to see where our future numbers take us. Somebody brings up the issue of multiracial, that many people report out as multiracial. When we report these statistics, and the officers do it every traffic stop, for 9 years they had to fill out a piece of paper and turn it in, and we have boxes of them if you guys want them to look at. And then went electronic. So after every traffic stop, they take a few more minutes on the side of the road or in a parking lot to fill in a form electronically, and that's how they capture the data. The data on the person's race and ethnicity is perception by the officer. It's how the officer perceives the driver. They're not supposed to ask them. If they have their driver's license, it may give them a clear indication of whether the person reports as white or black, or what their reported race is, and that's what they can put in the box. Or if they don't have the opportunity to collect the license, it's what the officer perceives the driver as. So you're right, many report out as multiracial, but the officer usually picks one and puts it in the box. Yes, please.
Yeah, so the standard as we see, again, perception is everything, but the standard as we see it at the ACLU, and the question we get from a lot of people in the public is, are the officers enforcing the rules across the board in a fair and equal way? Is there uniform enforcement? So in some communities, and I'll bring up East Haven because everyone knows of that situation, there was shown to be a bias in terms of enforcement of equipment violations, so a tail light out or a bald tire. In East Haven, the police were only enforcing that against Latino drivers, not white drivers. So that's the problem. You know, I don't think that the officers in this department or any department are making up reasons to pull people over. What we do get the calls about are where people say, I'm pulled over 5 times, in a month, whereas my white neighbor, who's driving the same way I do in the same kind of car, is not getting pulled over. So that's the question. Are the rules being enforced equally? And a lot of it comes down to those unconscious biases that we all have. So that's my answer to that.
So it's 8:30. I just want all of our panelists to have a small closing statement, and then we'll start with you. And then we can probably have snacks after that, and then we can have our conversations after that on the side.
Well, thank you very much. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to be invited here tonight to participate in this conversation, and I too agree. You have to start with a conversation and be open to what's being said. And a lot of times what we hear is not what we want to hear. But when we do hear it, to be open to it and say, let me stop for a minute. One thing I learned a few days ago, I'm being a little facetious, I've learned to say, I do not know. And I've also learned to say, I don't understand. But I know it's better to understand than be understood. And to do that, you have to have a conversation.
Wow. I want to say thanks to all the panelists who were gracious and agreed to be here tonight. I appreciate the collaboration with the South Windsor Human Relations Commission. I appreciate you empowering us to do this, Mayor Anwar. And I appreciate all of you that came out tonight. And I certainly appreciate all the men and women of the South Windsor Police Department that came out here to hear the comments that folks make. And I certainly hope if any of you have any comments that you would not hesitate to share them with us. I have faith in the men and women of the South Windsor Police Department, and I'm very proud to serve them, and I'm proud to serve the community. I think that we go out as far as we can go to serve the community in a community policing fashion. Community policing is policing. It's the way policing started. It's the way policing always should be done. You have to know the people in your community. You have to be willing to have conversations with the community, not just in group forums like this, but one-on-one. And we encourage our people to do that. And I think sometimes the people that work for the South Windsor Police Department may get frustrated because we treat people so well sometimes when maybe they think they shouldn't be treated well because of heinous acts that perhaps they've committed. But nonetheless, they know that that's the standard and that's what we expect from the people that work with the South Windsor Police Department. This conversation, I hope, is evidence that we are serious about the numbers. We're serious about examining the way our officers respond to calls, the way our officers enforce the law. We want to make sure that it's done in an unbiased manner and that it's done professionally and it's done fairly. We've had cameras in our cars for almost 2 decades now, and when there's a complaint, we say, go to the videotape. And we pull the tape, and I'll tell you, nearly every single time, if not every single time, I've gotten a complaint, and I bring up the fact that we have video in all of our cars, and I'm going to refer to the video. Suddenly, I never hear from the complainant again. We were one of the 9 communities that filed a racial profiling complaint last year. We had 1 complaint that was filed through me that may have been race-related. And I reviewed the video, and what happened on the video was nothing like was described to me on the telephone. I explained it to the person that complained. I offered to have them come and see the video, and I never heard from them again. And we processed that, and we sent that to CHRO, to the Chief State's Attorney's Office, which is what the statute requires, and that's one of the 9 complaints from that last year. None of those were founded, by the way. None of the 9 and throughout the state were founded. So we have cameras in the cars. We're exploring body cameras for our officers, because we understand that that can also assist in documentation, but cameras aren't the answer. Cameras aren't the solution. It's trust in the community, and it's communication with the community. We've reached out, 28 years I've been here. I think we've had a great relationship with the community, and we want community members to know that if there is a question about the conduct of our officers, they can come and see me. They can come and see someone at the town hall. There's somewhere they can go to make a complaint. And people don't hesitate to do that when they think we've done something wrong. I tend to be very approachable. My deputy chief is very approachable. Our supervisors are very approachable. And you share with them your concerns, and hopefully we're able to either say, you know what, that was probably wrong. We need to fix it. Or maybe it's perception. You don't understand why the officer did what they did, and we can explain it. But it's not cameras that are going to solve the problems. It's not recording everything. It's trust and communication. And so I hope what we do here tonight is representative of what we've done through the years and what we'll continue to do. Thank you.
I'm honored to be part of the panel. I think you have a great chief. We just have to figure out how to clone him and get him to all the other police departments in the state. Do read the report when it comes out. Continue the conversation. Ask questions of police, whether this is your department or another. Reach out to CHRO if you or someone in your family feels like they've been discriminated against. You can call our office as well. And just keep this in the conversation. Because once it ends, then we go back to where we were 7 or 8 years ago, where this is not getting any better, not getting that trust relationship's not being worked on.
Thank you, David. Again, thank you, Chief and Mayor Anwar, for inviting us here for this courageous conversation. As Ken mentioned earlier this evening, we all come to the table with implicit bias. And if we are going to increase trust, we do need to apply affirmative action in our hiring. If we want to increase diversity, we have to do proactive steps and not just rely on people to do the research on their own. And that's the one thing I would have to make a statement about. You know, at CHRO, we are responsible for reviewing affirmative action plans of state agencies. And what we do is look at the workforce of available work pool and what is actually there. And if we were to come to South Windsor and it looked like the available work pool is 15% minorities and your work staff is only 1%, then it would look like there needs to be some affirmative action goals. And what you need to know is that